There are legitimate questions being asked about how the country's debt situation got to where it is. Mr. Speaker, let me state emphatically that we have not been reckless in borrowing and in spending. It is worth noting that the debts we are serving were not only contracted during the period of this administration. Mr. Speaker, we have spent money on things that are urgent, to build roads and bridges and schools, to train our young people and equip them to face a competitive world. Considering the amount of work that still needs to be done on the state of our roads, the bridges that have to be built, considering the number of classrooms that need to be built, the furniture and equipment needs at all stages of education, considering the number of children who should be in school and are not, considering the number of towns and villages that still do not have access to potable water, I dare say no one can suggest we have overborrowed or spent recklessly. Yes, I've been in a hurry to get things done, and this includes massive developments in agriculture, education, health, irrigation, roads, rails, ports, airports, sea defense, digitization, social protection programs, industrialization, and tourism. And Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of the amount of work that we have done, especially in the road sector. Roads constitute the largest number of questions asked in this House by members of Parliament. A large amount of the monies we borrow are for road construction. Shall we dare stop constructing roads? Mr. Speaker, I would like to state categorically that this government has built more roads than any government in the history of the Fourth Republic. Indeed, the evidence of how state funds have been used to improve our society is all over the country.
Well, the president, however, had to confront the reality of the current debt situation. He touted the success of the controversial debt exchange program and assured that all bonds, both old and new, will be honored when they fall due.
It is clear that given the extent of the fiscal and debt sustainability issue we are addressing, fiscal adjustments and structural reforms are not sufficient for restoration of debt sustainability. A critical component of the measures we are implementing to address the current economic crisis is the debt operation, involving both domestic debt and external debt. The debt operation is aimed at returning the country to debt sustainable path by 2028. Mr. Speaker, in order to achieve these goals, the decision was taken to execute a domestic debt exchange program, in addition to fiscal adjustment, external debt operation, and structural reforms. The participation rate of 85%, representing tendered bonds of 83 billion cedis out of the total eligible bonds of 97.7 billion cedis, constitutes significant success for the DDE program. Mr. Speaker, I know it has been said over and over again in the past weeks, but the voluntary nature of the DDE program bears repeating, as is the fact that the government is committed to honoring all coupon payments and maturities in respect of both old bonds and the new bonds, in line with government fiscal commitments. Mr. Speaker,
Well, the president has, in the last few weeks, been pleading with European countries to help Ghana get China to agree to grant Ghana debt relief. He says China is now cooperating and was confident the March IMF Executive Board deadline will be met.
We're also making progress on the external debt negotiations since the government announced an external debt service suspension on 19th December 2022 for certain categories of external debt to ensure an orderly restructuring. This suspension is an interim emergency measure toward a comprehensive external debt operation which will contribute to the restoration of our debt sustainability in line with our request for debt treatment under the G20 Common Framework. I want to express our appreciation to members of the Paris Club and to the People's Republic of China for the cooperation they have so far exhibited to us in attempting to reach an agreement and in their attempt to establish an official credit committee. We look forward to their fast-tracking the needed financing assurances for IMF approval. We are confident that with their cooperation, we will reach our March deadline for going to the fund.
And I want to bring in two members of parliament who sat through today's State of the Nation address. Joining me is Isaac Adongo, is MP for Bogatanga Central and NDC member on the Finance Committee. Mr. Adongo, thank you for your time. You're on Top Story. Also joining me is Stephen Amwa, is MP for Nshaiso and Deputy Minister Designate for Trade and Industry. Hello, Mr. Amwa. Hello, Dr.
Hello,
great to have you, Dr. Amwa, who joins us. So we're joined shortly by Professor Godfred Bokwing. He's an economist and professor of finance at the University of Ghana. Before I bring the two gentlemen from Parliament into the conversation, there are quick factual issues that we needed to clear up for those who are asking. My colleague with the research desk is with me, Kofi Eji. So the huge issue was about the debt, and the president was talking about the fact that he hasn't been reckless. So we want to quickly clear up the facts around how much this president has accumulated in 6 years compared to what was before he came in. So let's start with his debt. How much did he meet and how much has he accumulated?
So, well, President Mahama actually inherited a debt burden of 36 billion Ghana cedis. This is from the Finance Ministry. So he inherited a debt burden of 36 billion in 2012, ended his tenure with a debt burden of 122 billion cedis. So he added a debt of 86 billion cedis. And if you strike the average, it means that President Mahama added a debt burden of 22 billion every year. And so he ended up increasing Ghana's debt burden by 239%. If you look at President Akufo-Addo, for instance, he inherited a debt burden of 122 billion Ghana cedis in 2016. And currently, as of November 2022, our current debt stock is 576 billion cedis. So it means that so far, in a span of 6 years, President Akufo-Addo has added a total of 454 billion Ghana cedis to our debt stock. So it means annually the president is adding 76 billion cedis to our debt stock every year. And our debt stock under President Akufo-Addo has increased by 372%.
I mean, Dr. Stephen Amo, the president says he hasn't been reckless in the borrowing. How so? When you consider that as a result of our current debt burden, which is well over 100% to GDP, we are going to the IMF. The economy is on the brink of collapse. We are begging European countries, Paris Club, to forgive our debt and give us some debt relief. We are asking them to plead on our behalf with China to also give us some debt relief. We haven't been here before. This current crisis is the worst in the generation. Isn't that the classic definition of reckless borrowing?
Thank you very much, Evans. My regards to our listeners this evening. Please, I beg you, this is a very important question you've asked, so allow me to explain. We cannot do this comparative analysis in the same context that people are looking at. We should look at the context in which we are doing it. In the first place, I find it very difficult when people want to separate even 2016 from what we took over before we got to this level. Per the percentage your gentleman has done, former President Mohamed one in 4 years, according to him, is about 239%, and that for Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo is 372%.
Yes.
Evans, if you consider our borrowing from what the former President Mahama, His Excellency, and John Mills took over, it was about 9.2, and they left 122 billion, which was over 1,000%. We should also look at that context. Then when you come to even the 4 years, the situations were entirely different. Evans, we have never had a situation in this country that workers were asked to stay home and yet they will be paid. Let's be very honest with ourselves. Workers were asked to stay home and yet they were paid. And the most important thing is the debt to GDP. A situation where Africa grew negative 2.02 and the world projection was negative 3.3 and we grew 0.4. And we had revenue shortfalls of over 11 billion. Private sector sacked tens of thousands of workers. We lost corporate taxes per year. Yet government had statutory obligations to perform in these times. Remember, our interest payment started increasing 2012 through to 2016. Then it started reducing to 2018. Then 2019, it started going up again. So even talking about interest payments that led to these things, we need to talk about the cumulated figure, and then the maturity dates for payments. So a situation where your productivity had been impaired uncontrollably, your GDP was not growing, there was no production for you to make revenue gains domestically, and yet you have to resort to financing statutory obligations, which force the government to even rely on borrowing. You cannot compare the two situations. Let's be very honest with ourselves. You cannot.
Okay, stay with me, Dr. Stephen Amwa. Isaac Adongo is on the line with me. Mr. Adongo, you sat in Parliament today. You heard the President address the big elephant in the room, which is our current debt crisis, which is really why we're where we are in the economy right now. He says, yes, admit I've borrowed, and the evidence we just laid out shows he's borrowed quite heavily, more than any government in our history. However, he makes the point that he hasn't done so recklessly. He says he's built roads, bridges, schools, and that's putting the money to good use.
Evans, I think it is quite clear that this country has been in very, very bad hands, and we've not taken good care of our country for all these years. When you're managing an economy, you manage an economy with ensuring that the environment in which you are managing the economy is sustainable. You have to make sure that when you're spending, you have the capacity to repay. You have so that you are managing your fiscal, such that you are not overspending beyond revenues that you don't have. And the evidence is staggering. Evans, by 2019, we were spending 91% of our total revenue and grants to service debt. That was not COVID. To service debt. As a matter of fact, the total was 70 billion. We increased that expenditure by 30 billion to 100 billion in 2020. In that year, we spent 129% of our total to service. All the revenues we collected were not enough to service our debt. We still needed to borrow 29% of the revenue we had generated in order to be able to service debt. No country would survive on that basis. And it was because when COVID was barely able to meet your debt service, you were doing 91% with total revenue and grants, and you had just 10% to move in 2020. It is obvious that you could not manage this economy even without COVID. Now, between 2020 and the budget of 2023, we have increased our total expenditure by 10%. We have the revenue. People's money. from 100 billion to 205 billion. I don't know the definition of recklessness that the president wants. This is the height of seriousness. It is the height of some. This can jeopardize the future of a country. I'm basically just saying, I don't care whether or not. As long as the market is willing to lend to me, I will make future generations.
Unfortunately, we have a terrible connection to Mr. Isaac Adongo. We're going to call him back, hopefully on a better connection, so we can hear the submission that he's making. As you know, this is a State of the Nation as delivered by the President today in Parliament, and the minority always have their own say on this matter. We'll get an independent view on what has happened today with the President, starting off by laying the foundation that he was going to focus almost exclusively on the economy, and for right reason. We are facing an unprecedented economic crisis, and we'll try and get Mr. Adongo back in. But I still have Stephen Amwa, who is still with me. Mr. Amwa, I mean, at the heart of the argument today in presenting what the State of the Nation is, of course, is the current economic crisis and its impact on the ordinary man. The President acknowledges that. But he spends a significant amount of time today trying to explain why it is not his fault, and that it is Ukraine and it is the pandemic. In the time we are in, we simply want solutions. Won't you agree that that is the most important, state of the ordinary man's affairs currently?
Yes. Sorry, Evans, I think I understand where you're coming from, and to me, you're making a good point. But we are serving people. People have given us their mandate. And a lot of people along our social stratification with different understandings are asking questions. How did we get here? How come our debt to GDP has moved up? How come our interest payments have increased? How much have you gotten? How did you use the money? So it was so critical, it was so important that our president account to the people how what we've gotten have been put to use and why we got there. And then beyond that, the steps we're taking as a government, which they did, that has been clearly done. In fact, 2023 budget emphatically states how government is going to deal with the situation and consolidate our fiscal space. And that was where we have 30% emolument cut, 50% fuel and other expenses cut used by government or state institutions, some other projects that were supposed to be done that we deem not too critical, whose impact on our GDP not too significant. Government was going to stop or has started or has stopped even doing all these things. But Evans, my point is that every situation calls for different solutions. Let's be very honest with ourselves. Nobody is saying that we have not borrowed in March or we haven't really increased our debt portfolio. In any case, our country characteristically or ritually has what is termed as negative effective tax rate economy. Check all years. Most of the years we run deficit, even when there was no COVID. Let's run it. Look, even the year 2000, we had our debt to GDP almost 150%. They are facts. I'm not saying we want to do comparison, but I'm saying that the way our economy is structured, to me, we need to find solutions. We define new paradigm shift as a country. We define our corporate focus. We need to do something about it. I agree. But what I'm saying is that let us treat this in the context that as a country we can understand why we are here and how going forward we can deal with things. But if people are saying that, how did you spend the money? You got so much. Your debt to GDP is up. Interest payments going up. Knowing that interest payments, two things critically need to be analyzed. Accumulated debt, which only know from Nana Akufo-Addo's time, His Excellency. And then maturity days that span during different terms or different times and situations. So we need to consider that. Then we also think about the fact that we had about 21 months of impaired productivity uncontrollably in our country. That made us rely on debt financing because our domestically raised or generated revenue were having shortfalls. Even when we wanted to come up with policies, fiscal space policies to generate a lot of revenues domestically, our brothers, because of the seemingly balanced numbers we had in Parliament, put impediments in our ways, making even the foreign investors lose confidence in us, led to downgrading our credit or whatever credibility, leading to a whole lot of issues. So it's not just one factor we should consider here. All of us, if probably they had cooperated with us to actually implement all the fiscal policies, revenue generation policies, and we're able to do them well, probably wouldn't have even gotten where we are, or the severity of it.
Doc, stay with me again. Thankfully, we have Mr. Adongo back on the line. Hopefully, the better connection, and he can articulate his points with some clarity. Mr. Adongo, you were making a point about the debt situation, why that was fundamental to the current economic challenges.
Hello? I can hear people.
Hello, Mr. Adongo. I think he may have lost him again.
Yeah, I think it's better now.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, you could proceed.
Yes. So the point that I'm making is that the president has demonstrated enough humility, accepting the fact that yes, we have crisis, but in the context we are describing, the crisis has been induced majorly, not wholly, but majorly by this global crisis. The IMF boss said that, and it's a fact. Before then, we were doing so much well. Our lending rate have been reduced way over 30 down to about 20. Policy rate have been reduced from about 25.5 to about 12. GDP annually was growing about 7%. Things were going on well.
Okay, stay with me again. Thankfully, Mr. Adongo is back. Hopefully, I can get him to make his point on the debt situation, the current economic crisis. Mr. Adongo, thankfully, you're back. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you.
Fantastic, it's clearer. You're making a point about the current economic crisis and the debt situation.
Yeah, and I make the point. It's very surprising that somebody would make an argument that when you have a balanced parliament and your economy is very strong and you present a feasible program to parliament, rating agencies will downgrade you. It just doesn't happen. Look, but the issue is this. It is not possible to run an economy where by 2019, before COVID, you were spending 91% of your total revenue and grants to service debts, and still want to blame somebody else for the challenges of this economy. You had only 9% left to pay compensation, to pay for statutory funds, which you have already used to pay debt service, to pay for goods and services, and to have in it and to borrow. So almost everything you have to do in the budget, you have to simply borrow, because all your total revenue and grants were dedicated 91% to service the debt. Was there any COVID? Was there any Russia-Ukraine war? Absolutely, this was incompetence. Look, you move the total expenditure of our country from 70 billion in 2019 to 100 billion, 30 billion more because you said it was COVID. Now, after COVID was gone, a rational person would have eliminated all the expenditures that you made for COVID, come back to 70 billion, and organically grow your expenditure so that it will reflect actual expenditures you need minus COVID. You still continue to spend as though there was still COVID. And by 2023, you are budgeting to increase our total expenditure from the COVID period of 2020 by 100%. Evans, who does this? You are a broke nation. You can't pay your debt service. After 2020, you were spending 129% of your total revenue and grants just to service debt. In other words, your total revenue and the grants you went around begging friendly nations to give you were just not enough to service your debt. You now needed to borrow 29% of the total revenue and grants to add up to your total revenue and grants to meet debt service alone. And yet, you began to expand your expenditure even when you were not able to meet your debt service alone. To the extent that you are budgeting to grow your expenditure to 205 billion from 70 billion in 2019. If this is not the height of recklessness, tell me what this one is. And by when you came to present your 2022 budget and we told you that look, your 142 billion expenditure, which is 100% growth of your 2019 figure, was simply insane, and you needed to do something about it. You ignored us.
But Mr. Adongo, today the president took time to account for what he used the borrowed money for. He told you he's spent the money to build roads, and he claims that he's built in terms of kilometers, the most roads in this country. And he challenged the MPs to tell him if he shouldn't have built those roads with the funds that he borrowed.
Let me tell you, if you want to see how roads are built, you look at your capital expenditure. In 2019, you did 6 billion. Is it the 6 billion that would have transformed Ghana's infrastructure into that of paradise? Your highest, after last year, was 16 billion, for goodness sake. And we are talking the equivalent of 600 billion, an additional 400 billion Ghana cedis. And you are doing roads of 16 billion, and you say that is the reason you borrowed so much. If the Minister for Roads is answering more questions in Parliament, doesn't that tell you it's because our roads are not done? And you have admitted that roads is the most critical question that the Minister for Roads answered in the House. Why? Is because the roads are not being built. Who will call the Minister to ask him questions if his roads are built? But because the roads are not built, the Minister for Roads spends the entire Friday, every time Parliament is in session, to come and answer questions for non-delivery of roads. These are the realities. And you have a president appear before us and basically run down the credibility of our country and tell all Ghanaians who know the challenges and the pains they are going through that they are lying and that he lives in a different world.
But
now you paint an example of heaven, and then in the end you say that I'm at the IMF to try and deliver us from hell.
But the president, to be fair,
how does that work?
But the president today admitted that the economy is in crisis and the reason why they are going, and that he promises to fix the challenges.
When they promised to move this economy from taxation to production, that's where we got. You saw him begging Parliament to improve additional taxes for him. That was the promise. When he promised that he would deliver one village, one dam, you saw yesterday when he came, when he's talking about irrigation, he didn't mention the one village, one dam. He was talking about Tammany Dam, which was built by His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, the pond dam that was expanded by John Mahama to provide water to a lot of Ghanaians. He talked about Tono irrigation project that was reconstructed by the Ghana Commercial Agriculture Project, where John Mahama secured $150 million to develop that in VIA. And even though they didn't use the VIA money for VIA, they still could not even complete the Tono Dam. These are all the signs that even John Mahama is the one working in opposition. This government was the biggest mistake we made. They've damaged our economy. How can debt restructuring, taking people's monies and assets, as people who call yourself property-owning Democrats, be a success? If you have succeeded in denying Ghanaians their money they have given you per trust, and you force Ghanaians to surrender their money to you, do you celebrate this as a success?
I mean, Isaac Adongo, thank you very much for joining us. Also to you, Dr. Stephen Amwa. Both gentlemen will join me for a bigger conversation with more time to explore the many issues, including the president talking about how he spent the COVID funds that they got during the height of the pandemic, plus also accounting for the issues surrounding the vaccine shortage and the fuel prices that the president believes the prices will go down further and will lead to transport fares reductions. You want to join us on PM Express for that? Isaac Adongo and Stephen Amma will join me. We'll also get Professor Godfrey Bokwe, who, by the way, will join me on News Night, which starts in a minute.